Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nathan Woodliff-Stanley, Executive Director of the ACLU of Colorado, and I speak in favor of House Bill 1191. It is clear to the ACLU that this bill is both timely and desperately needed. At least 76 communities in Colorado have passed more than 350 ordinances criminalizing nearly everything that a person who is homeless needs to do to survive, including the harmless act of sitting, sleeping, or resting pretty much anywhere, from a park bench to your own car. I would submit that it is essentially impossible to be homeless. We are seeing a race to the bottom as municipalities compete to be the most hostile to people experiencing homelessness, hoping to drive them somewhere else, or hiding them in jails at a taxpayer cost of millions of dollars. Communities copy each other's ordinances. And to the extent that communities are successful in driving away some of their unhoused population, it affects neighboring communities that don't pass these ordinances. The Right to Rest Act recognizes that this proliferation of anti-homeless ordinances is a matter of statewide concern, and that the only way to stop this race to the bottom is to pass statewide legislation limiting the criminalization of homelessness. The ACLU has witnessed firsthand the statewide nature of this issue as we fought the targeting of unhoused persons, including hundreds of unlawful arrests that we have documented, and successfully curtailing unconstitutional panhandling ordinances in communities from Grand Junction to Colorado Springs to Fort Collins, with ripple effects on communities with existing or proposed ordinances from Telluride, Greeley, Denver, Boulder, Durango, Steamboat Springs, and many other locations. Municipalities do watch each other, and there should be no doubt that this is a matter of statewide concern. Nearly all of the objections to the Right to Rest Act in last year's legislative session were related to the private right of action and a stated fear of frivolous lawsuits, which is not an issue at all in this year's bill. All this bill does is to put the brakes on a headlong rush across Colorado to put criminal penalties on people who are homeless, which obviously does nothing to solve the underlying problems that cause homelessness in the first place. My work on this issue has changed me. Because today, so many of the unhoused people that I see are now people that I know. I see that it is hard enough to be homeless without facing a constant threat of arrest, often literally for doing nothing, being pushed out of public spaces that are supposed to be public, having your civil liberties violated, and being unable to meet your most basic human needs, including simple rest. Virtually nowhere in Colorado is there adequate affordable housing or even enough shelter beds for those who need them. When the police say, move along, just where exactly are you supposed to go? Read the research, and you will see that we need this law.
Representative Honor.
Thank you very much for coming today, and thank you for making a very compelling argument. I agree that there needs to be some sort of a statewide solution for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, especially as with our growth and our density and our municipalities bumping into each other and those sorts of things. But I have one question. I understand there's some federal cases pending. Can you get us up to date on where those are, how a resolution of those might impact sort of what we're doing in terms of statewide? Do you know about that?
I'm not sure what cases you're referring to. There were cases. There was actually a case last year that it was in the Supreme Court that related to church signs, but it actually made very clear that panhandling laws couldn't apply in a way that discriminated against the content of the message. But I'm not sure that's what you're referring to. Oh, the decision against Grand Junction. Oh, I see. Yes, the ACLU did have a case in Grand Junction, which we won, and I imagine that's still on appeal. That was actually partly based upon the Supreme Court case that I just mentioned, but it found unconstitutional their panhandling ordinance, and that is related to, but it's actually not exactly what the Right to Rest Act is addressing. Panhandling ordinances are part of the problem, but this particular act is really addressed more at the things that prevent people from being able to sit or sleep or rest or frankly simply exist in most of our communities.
Representative Singer?
Thank you very much. I honestly just didn't know the answer to that question. And then one other thing about the policy in this bill that kind of confuses me, if you could clear it up, or maybe the bill sponsor. So if this bill were to pass, and I think we have a lot of amendments, so I'm not sure if I'm speaking the amended version or the introduced version, so bear with me. As it reads now, before any amendments have been discussed or passed, a city can make an ordinance, but what this bill says, that they're forbidden from enforcing that ordinance. Okay? As pertaining to homeless, as defined in this bill on page 4. Okay.
Reference to police and reference to who has to move along and who doesn't. I'm just trying to understand the minor thing.
That was my question, and so I think the bill sponsors have cleared that up very adequately. This pertains to every person, regardless of their homeless status. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Singer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to try and answer the question for Representative Hart, but I'm not going to confuse the issue any further because I think you were satisfied with your answer. But I am going to go to my question. So, and hopefully, if you are sitting on a park bench, you are responded to differently because of your ACLU badge. But maybe that's a different story altogether. So my question is, as someone who represents an organization that litigates some of these cases, one of the arguments, I guess I have multiple questions here, and I'll try and maybe I'll ask one and then see if we can get with the other ones. So with the removal of the right of action, does that hinder your ability as a community organization, as a civil liberties organization, to be plaintiffs on these cases? I guess that where you're determining that there is harassment or discrimination or unequal treatment of homeless individuals.
Can you please respond?
Madam Chair, it might limit some of the claims that those plaintiffs might be able to have themselves. I think our biggest concern in this is simply trying to change the laws themselves so that there is this right to rest, that public spaces are public, that people aren't being arrested and criminalized for things that are in fact harmless and should be available to everyone.
Representative Singer?
An hour and a half talking to both sides of this issue, an hour and a half each. One of the arguments made by some of the opponents who of this bill, who I think are equally well-intentioned, is that if something like this were to pass, their ability to intervene with someone to get them out of a homeless situation would be hindered. And I asked them to give me some examples, and I hope we get to hear some of those examples again today. And so I'm going to do my best to sort of reiterate what they told me, and then maybe you can sort of walk them out of that legal thicket if this bill were to become law. Their argument was, if they saw someone who, potentially violating the ordinance that was passed by the city of Denver, I guess back in 2012, relating to the camping ban, or any other number of laws, they said that those would be basically nullified or made questionable, and they would be hesitant as a law enforcement mechanism to even approach those individuals to give that homeless person options about shelters they might want to stay at,
that doesn't come from law enforcement.
Housing systems. And so maybe you can explain this since you're an attorney and I'm not. Are they really hamstrung in their ability to intervene in those situations if this bill were to become law?
It's not law enforcement.
Madam Chair, I would suggest for one thing that some of the testimony from people who are experiencing homelessness will speak to this very well. I think that in the people who are in that situation are usually keenly aware of what resources are and are not available to them. It is almost never the case that a police intervention is going to give them access to a service that they otherwise wouldn't have. And in fact, most often those interventions are either actual, arrests or ticketing, or they're the move along kind of intervention, where it says, just leave here, move along, go somewhere else, which is not at all providing any kind of resources. I think it's almost never that those encounters actually create resources for people who otherwise wouldn't have or know about them.
Take a little stab at that as well. In the bill, page 4, line 12, we define harassment. And harassment is directing a specific person that that a reasonable person would consider seriously alarming, threatening, tormenting, or terrorizing. And so I don't think that this precludes law enforcement from being able to approach an individual and basically ask them if they need help. It's when they're actually going to the steps of threatening, tormenting, or terrorizing them that then it becomes an issue. And so I've heard those exact same concerns as well. And I don't want to say that law enforcement does a very good job, especially in cities like Fort Collins, where they are helping out people who are experiencing homelessness find various resources. And so we also didn't want to make sure that we weren't keeping them from being able to help by making sure that harassment is defined in this way.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, honestly, I don't know the answer to this question. Is harassment already illegal, or is harassment legal?
Representative Salazar.
In the context of this bill, this defines harassment differently than what criminal law would define harassment, or how civil rights laws would define harassment. This is harassment that's tailored for those persons who experience homelessness.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One more follow-up on that. So, I'm not a lawyer. Is harassment is illegal now, in a way, and this bill would put additional protections on that harassment? Is that what that would do?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I can't ever remember any time when a police officer has ever been charged for harassment under criminal law filed by a person experiencing homelessness. So this definition is much different from criminal law. This one, like I said, is very tailored towards persons who experience homelessness. So it's different, yes.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to our witness, and I appreciate the dialogue, though. So one more practical situation, and maybe you can walk me out of this one too. I was approached by an institution of higher education that's concerned about individuals that might be utilizing different public spaces in a manner other than students, or at a time different than students. An example being, an individual sleeping on the quad in a public space, but not necessarily, unless the bus just won the national championship, not necessarily a place where students might be sleeping, or interfering in a library situation where they'd be using the library as shelter as opposed to using it for research purposes. Now, obviously, students use the library for many purposes other than research, and I'm not speaking from any personal experience. But that being said, there are concerns about interference on an academic campus. On an academic campus, if this bill were to pass, can you maybe explain to me how either with this bill's passage, they would still be able to say, look, really you can't be sleeping here. You can't be. This is a study carrel. It's meant for people to study at, and students and anyone else would be treated equally there. But is there how does this bill address that?
Mrs. Son.
Madam Chair, and the bill sponsors may be able to say more about whether there's any special factor that would relate to, you know, academic institutions, but I mean, the main question is, what's public space? Who's able to be in that public space? Nothing would change, as we've heard before, any other laws. In other words, the right to rest doesn't give you the right to, you know, to harm other people or to obstruct passageways, or, I mean, the things that are illegal for other reasons would still be illegal. If it is truly a public space, and I've seen plenty of students sprawled out on lawns with their books, if that space is truly public, I would think other people could, you know, be there as well. If it's a space that is able to be restricted to certain groups of people, then that would still be the case.
Representative Singer,
Oh, and it looks like Representative Salazar had a follow-up, if that's okay.
Representative Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Singer, for the question. And we do have an amendment that addresses that concern in terms of institutions of higher education. You know, as the definition stands now on page 5, starting on line 6, is that in the context of an enclosed building or structure, the term public space applies only when the building or structure is open to the public. We are looking to amend that says, with respect to a building that is part, and Madam Chair, is it okay if I could speak to the amendment?
Sure, please.
Thank you. With respect to a building that is part of a public institution of higher education, where access to such building after normal operating hours is available only to persons with prior authorization, the term public space only applies to the normal operating hours for such buildings. So a good example is, and this is something that Representative Danielson had brought up, is the art building at CU Boulder. Not necessarily open to the public after its public hours, its normal operating hours, but still open to the students. And so therefore, a person who is experiencing homelessness, if they don't have authorization to be there, then they can't be there because it's after normal operating hours.
Being here and entertaining these questions. So one of the other arguments that I heard from the opponents is that if this bill were to pass, that I should expect to see tent cities popping up on city property in different places. I should expect to see, you know, unobstructed individuals without any intervention being able to basically sit, rest, or stay basically anywhere. And they cited you know, images from Los Angeles where there are these, you know, basically what are, you know, unregulated tent cities popping up. Would law enforcement be just rightly unable to do this, or is there a way to explain this to the opponents to say that that's not what would be allowed to happen, that's not what would happen, that's even if a group were to attempt to do that, you know, here's your way out, city of X or county of X, in terms of alleviating what could potentially become a public health issue.
To the bill sponsor, or?
Well, you know, it's either to the bill sponsor, whoever would like to answer the question. There's 3 of you, so whoever would like to respond to that is.
Who would like to take that on?
Madam Chair, I can at least start the response. Again, other things that are illegal are not suddenly made legal by this law, and you know, I would think if there are situations that are major sanitary issues and things like that, I would guess that there are other laws that apply. But what I really want to say is that if it were a consequence of this bill that people experiencing homelessness were more visible in some way, I think that is actually a good thing and not a bad thing, because it is precisely the attempt to try to hide the problem of homelessness rather than actually address the problem of homelessness that is one of the core things driving all of these ordinances. We need to, as a society, face up to the real issues of homelessness and the underlying causes. If it makes us uncomfortable to see homelessness, maybe that's exactly what we need.
Representative Ron.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I could not agree with you more that we need to rise up, address the causes of homelessness, the impacts of homelessness, the experience of people experiencing homelessness. I could not agree with you more. I think back to my earlier line of questioning was, this bill specifically says it's for everyone, and it doesn't have any services for homeless in it. I couldn't agree with you more on what you just said. Homelessness should never be a crime, ever. It's not a crime to be without a home, it's not a crime to be poor, it's not a crime to be disadvantaged or disabled. That's horrible and terrible and never, never, never. I'm struggling with this bill because when we say that it's for everyone, I don't think it gets to what we're really trying to do, which is help people experience homelessness. That's my concern.
Representative Salazar.
Thank you very much. And boy, I wish we had a perfect bill like that addressed the issue of homelessness. That's not what this bill is for. This bill is to stop the criminalization of people experiencing homelessness. That is the one cog in an entire machinery, a very complex machinery. And this is the one cog that we are addressing. Now, if you want the entire cog or the entire machinery, it's going to take the state, it's going to take cities, it's going to take counties in order to address that, right? And there have been a multitude of studies, including by the state of Colorado, just within the past few years, that talks about this machinery and how complex it is. We know that with this bill here, that we are addressing a multitude of very dire issues. Number one is the constitutional violations that we are seeing. Number two is that we are addressing just as a mere matter, is just criminalizing of a human being doing what human beings do, right? So that's what this cog is, and once we get this one down, then we can start working on the next ones, because as Nathan said here just a bit ago, maybe we should start feeling a little bit more uncomfortable in order to start addressing the problem in a more substantive way.
Thank you for your testimony, Nathan. Do you want to add?
I did. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I definitely understand your concern around the fact that this is for every person, because I did hear you bring that up. But again, if we're decriminalizing something, if we're bringing true civil rights to an issue, then we can't have just a special carve out that says, okay, well, if you're homeless, you can sleep in the park, but if you're not homeless, you can't. However, but again, this is an issue of decriminalization, of not hurting someone because they have no other place to go. And by leveling the playing field for them to give them the same rights as everyone else.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Melton. I totally agree. I'm just not sure this bill does that.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up the next three witnesses. Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question for Mr. Stanley. I saw he snuck to the back of the room. But he also has quite an amen corner behind him. It seems like everything he said was getting a lot of agreement from the fans. Mr. Stanley, I do have a question for you about litigation. And I want to thank you for...
Talk back, please.
Sorry to recall you from the bullpen there. I want to thank you, sir, over here, for the work that you do defending civil liberties. And the times that I agree with you, boy, I'm glad you're there, because we need an advocate in the courtroom to litigate sometimes. And you said this bill is different than last year's bill, because last year's bill had a private right of action, and that was taken out. And this year's bill is not going to lead to more lawsuits. But I also noticed this bill creates 5 brand new rights. They're listed A, B, C, D, E. And I heard you answer Representative Singer by saying, well, yeah, there may be some litigation involved. It's not going to get rid of all the lawsuits, or you are a litigating organization. I assume, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the way you would try to enforce these 5 new rights which are put into Colorado statute by suing some people, and who would the defendants be in some of those lawsuits?
Madam Chair, our purpose in this law is not litigation. Our purpose is to try to actually change the law and to have these be the rights that everyone has, and that those rights are enjoyed by everyone. I think that we would certainly observe what's happening, and if there are communities that were actually violating the law, that could conceivably be the subject for action. But that's not what this is about. This is about protecting the rights of everyone, including people who are unhoused, and I think it's very much for them. It would be extremely ironic to not favor this because it doesn't do enough for people who are homeless, because I think this room is full of people who are homeless who care about this bill very much right now.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Representative Clemens-Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for that answer. So, it sounds like, even if it's a last resort, there may have to be lawsuits sometimes against cities or against whoever might be violating this law, were this law to pass. But then I was brought a question about the rights of private property owners, especially business people. And I noticed in this bill, as it is unamended, there is not a protection for example, a sandwich shop or a grocery store or a movie theater. If someone were sleeping in their doorway and a private security staff came out and said, "Move along, please, you're obstructing our right to have a business here." Is it possible that private property owners could be sued if this lawsuit were to become, if this law were to become law, or would you only sue municipalities?
Madam Chair, we don't have plans to sue anyone. This is again about having general
Mickey
rights.
Mouse.
I know this was a matter of significant discussion last year about private guards. I would defer to the bill sponsors. I don't know all the amendments that are in the works, so I would defer to the bill sponsors about where they see that particular issue.
Representative Salazar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. We're in here that talks about an individual right of action or the ability to sue a property owner, a small business, or anything. It's very clear on page 5, lines 19 through 22. This is a prohibition of county cities and municipalities from enacting laws or adopting ordinances that limits, prohibits, or penalizes, and then it provides certain sections. So it doesn't say anything about private businesses. And if a city, county, or municipality decided to flaunt or ignore this law, then yes, there would be some enforcement action taken against that county, city, or municipality to stop them from doing that. More than likely an injunction of some sort. More than likely some type of action to strike down that law as being in violation of state law. That's what we're looking at. But this isn't, as we indicated, as we discussed privately, there's no private right of action in here.
So these are going to be the next 3 witnesses I'm going to call up.